the main kind of pillars, and then we'll just move into the...
And then we'll just briefly chat about it. That's the way we do it.
Yeah, that would be a great idea. Coming up, ANA published guidelines in conclusion of 12 months investigation into media transparency. Hello and welcome to IDCOM's Media Snack, episode 35. Big week this week. The ANA in the US have published their guidelines, which is the conclusion of 12 months investigation into media transparency in the US.
Yeah, we're going to look at the key elements of that report and also assess the implications both from an advertiser and an agency side.
Great. All coming up in today's Media Snack in just the time it takes to eat a sandwich, and it will be shorter than previous episodes, we promise. Okay, so today we're just going to be focusing on the ANA guidelines.
Yeah.
So this week the ANA published the final component of their reporting on the back of the investigation they've obviously been doing, which we've talked a lot about in the US, into agency practice around rebates and various non-transparent practices. So this acts really as conclusion to that whole initiative. The ANA, this has been a year's work for them, and I have to say they've done a fantastic job really of bringing to light some kind of key issues in the industry and actually leaving now behind some incredibly valuable assets.
Absolutely.
We're going to focus on the guidelines, which, as we say, is the final part of that project. Now the guidelines, the K2 report that we talked about, which was presenting all the evidence that they'd found during the investigation, was heavily focused on agency behaviour. It's very kind of 90% of the content of that was really looking at agencies. We've been very pleasantly surprised to see that the content of the guidelines is actually really focused on marketers and marketers' behaviour. It's at least kind of 60%, if not more, of the emphasis of this. So we think it's good. The guidelines are good. They're fair. They're balanced. They're not too challenging for marketers, but they do present just some good ideas about how they can improve behaviour. So let's kind of dig into some of those.
I also think they're going to be really well received from the advertiser community. So it offers two things, the report. The first is a set of 3 pillars that advertisers should adopt to establish stronger, more trustworthy relationships with their agencies. The first is setting out a set of principles in terms of agency management. So what they expect their agencies to do in terms of contractual and transparency. The second is, they call it primacy, establishing primacy of the advertiser-agency relationship. Essentially, that just means taking back responsibility and accountability in-house.
Which we've talked about a lot, is this idea that marketers should take more control over their media.
And it's incredibly clearly stated that is a critical component of these guidelines. And thirdly, and very simply, it suggests that a code of conduct be established between agency and advertiser. And this code of conduct be signed by both parties and act as an addendum to the contract that they sign. So, I mean, a really simple, nice way of establishing, I think, the platform for greater trust moving forward. The second thing that it provides is a set of strategic principles or guidelines in critical areas. So it addresses the issue of the agency acting either as agent or principal, and provides some very clear direction and recommendations as to how to manage that situation. It talks about the importance of contracts, it talks about the importance of data management, it talks about the importance of assessing auditing rights. So it provides very clear direction for an advertiser that perhaps hasn't considered these things as to how they can perhaps tighten up some of the contractual issues that have caused the problems that we find ourselves in at the moment.
And that's in line, I think, with a lot of the narrative that we've followed really for the last 12 months. I mean, and certainly I think every single media snack, I'm sure you're aware, we've referenced this story at some point along the line, is marketers taking back more control and exerting rights on contracts. And so much of the issues that were highlighted in the original report, and now they're built, guidelines are built around, is really just a symptom of, very weak contracts and rights and clients executing those rights historically. So the ANA very clearly in the guidelines here, and they're talking publicly, are challenging their members, challenging all marketers to now invest some time and resource in understanding how to be better clients.
Absolutely.
For the agency, but also how to understand and champion the role of media internally within their business. Because we've seen too many brands think that you can spend, and think of media, hundreds of millions of dollars worth of media investment being considered a spend, delegated off to the agency with very little oversight. And that's something which is now kind of very clear in the report.
And it talks about championing and establishing a role for a chief media officer, which I think is it's a brilliant title, and B, it's a brilliant initiative.
Yeah.
I mean, we often come across large organisations that spend inordinate amounts of money on media that have very junior, perhaps procurement people looking after media. Having somebody with an understanding of media and an appreciation of how to best get the most out of their agencies, leading that and providing that governance and leadership internally is absolutely critical. And I hope more advertisers take that suggestion on board.
Yeah, exactly. And that sets them on a path, as we discussed last week, on a race to the top. As a marketer, if you've got somebody, very experienced, good expertise, understanding in media within your team, inside the company, you can set media as a lever for growth for your business, and you avoid this race to the bottom on costs, which has just created so many of the issues.
And from the agency perspective, they welcome that as well, because they have somebody within the client side that understands media, that can champion strong strategic ideas, that is able to articulate and converse with them in a language that they're used to. So they would embrace that. They would encourage that, I'd imagine, to have a senior stakeholder managing and providing leadership on media internally on the client side.
Yeah. So there's the original K2 report. Yeah. There's the guidelines here, and there was a nice little surprise as well that came with this, which I don't think anybody was expecting. Was a third asset, which is actually a contract template. Yeah. Now, the ANA, as I sat in the room when they announced back in May that they didn't have plans to create a contract template. But what they've done, and I think this is, I think it's a great thing that they've done, is they have taken inspiration from the contract done in the UK by ISBA, which we were party to. We talked about that before, and we think is a really good asset available to ISBA members. And then the ANA have kind of built a customized version of that appropriate for the US market, addressing some of the findings that K2 found. And that's a readily available asset. This is, they've distributed this kind of public domain. It's not just for ANA members. I think it's a fantastic gift, actually, as a collection of 3 assets.
Absolutely.
I think the ANA have done a fantastic job. They've delivered this and they've navigated this, very sensitive area very professionally, and what they've left now that this project is concluded, are 3 very, very useful assets for marketers to be far better at media than they were 12 months ago.
So they've provided a toolkit, right? So we have a framework agreement, arguably best in class framework agreement. You have guiding principles, and you've got instructions on how best to manage your agency. The challenge, though, is to negotiate and implement that contract, because
it's all theory at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. And with the best will in the world, there's no agency in the world that will accept immediately the framework that the ANA or ISBA, when we know that from experience, have created, because it is really challenging, and it is taking the agency and the holding groups to places that perhaps they haven't been before. So the challenge, I think, on the advertiser side is to absorb everything that they have and then come up with a really clear plan as to how they can then negotiate and execute the best possible contract for them.
Yeah. And the contract, the UK contract, when that was released, they were talking about readdressing the balance, empowering marketers, giving them more control, and the contract was going to be able to do that. You'd expect then naturally and we've reviewed the contract, and it's pretty robust. I mean, it's a good piece of work. Agencies are not just going to necessarily willingly roll over and accept all the terms in that. So as a marketer, how do you implement a good asset like that? And I'm assuming that you're also going to be in a long line of other members, A&A members and US advertisers queuing up now to implement this best practice.
So what it is, it's a framework, okay? So advertisers should be looking to take best practice terms and elements of the framework and then embed those within their existing contract in order to improve it. So I don't think it's designed to be taken as it is and then thrust in front of an agency. It is designed to be taken in piecemeal based on what is important to that particular client and then absorbed within the larger kind of contract. But that takes expertise. And then conducting that negotiation is a critical part of any kind of process, because you need to understand the areas that are most critical to you, and you need also to understand and appreciate the areas where you can perhaps provide some concession. And that takes a plan. But if you get through that stage, your terms and the position that you hold with your agency will be significantly stronger.
Yeah, exactly. And we find, I mean, in our work with clients, that obviously drafting the contract language is obviously one small step, implementing it is another, but then also that's part of a much bigger, holistic program. Typically, just putting in place the right contract or the standardized contract language is not enough. It has to be developed bespoke for your particular requirements. Absolutely. Because every marketer's demands and requirements of media agency resource, it differs, and they need to find or create the right environment or opportunity with the agency in order to negotiate that. I mean, you want to negotiate on the front foot, don't you? So you have to find the right time, the right opportunity, and the right climate in which to negotiate that.
And we've talked a lot about balance in an equilibrium in a whole host of different areas. And the best contracts that we have seen, and the most effective contracts I think we've probably been involved in, are those that champion the rights and the causes of the client, but also appreciate that the elements that the agencies will also push back on. So finding that common territory that doesn't compromise one versus the other, I think, is really important.
There will be a lot of action. A lot of brands now have been perhaps waiting for these to try and really decide exactly how they were going to execute against the findings that the A&A have presented. We'll expect a busy summer, or maybe a quiet summer, people kind of reading and reflecting. There's lots of conversation already being generated from this stuff. And perhaps towards the end of the year, we'll see brands really starting to try to implement better contracts, one thing, but also really upscaling or upgrading their own internal capabilities. And any inaction or inertia in this area is just going to leave a brand at a disadvantage. They've got to do something.
I couldn't agree with you more. And I think, slightly more holistically, I think that this draws to a conclusion, I hope, what has been quite a toxic and disruptive 18-month period. And I think it has drawn to a close in a really positive way, because I think that those guidelines are really fair and well considered, and I'm hoping that we will now find ourselves in an environment that we can move forward in a really positive way with.
Good. Well, on that positive tone, that's all for this week. Please subscribe to the channel to be kept updated with new content, but that's all for this week. Bye for now.
Have a good weekend.